And the Lord, in his infinite wisdom, guides the steps of men and women according to his purposes, and all things come to pass as he has ordained from the foundation of the earth. In the land of Midian, where the dry winds whispered of God's eternal majesty, lived a priest of the Most High named Jethro. He was a man revered for his understanding of the divine ways, a worshipper of the one true God in the midst of a world darkened by idols. Jethro dwelt in peace with his household, his daughters tending his flocks and honoring the statutes of the Lord. Among them was Zipporah, his eldest, a woman of both strength and grace, whose heart sought after the ways of righteousness. From her youth, Zipporah had been taught to look beyond the mountains of Midian and to see the hand of God in all things. She would often sit by the fire at night, listening to her father recount the stories of creation, of Noah and the flood, and of Abraham, the man called out of Ur to walk by faith in the promises of the Lord. These stories, rich with the truth of God's covenant, filled her heart with awe and a deep longing to understand the ways of El Shaddai, the Almighty. "Father," she once asked, "why does the Lord allow his people to suffer in the midst of the nations? Does he not see their pain?" Jethro, stroking his beard, replied, "The Lord's purposes are beyond our understanding, my daughter, but know this, he does not forsake his people. In his time, he will deliver them, for he is faithful to his covenant. Until then, we walk by faith and not by sight." Zipporah held these words close to her heart, never knowing how they would prepare her for the role she was destined to play in God's unfolding plan. One day, as Zipporah and her sisters went to draw water from the well, they were met with opposition from the shepherds who sought to claim the water for themselves. This was a common trial, for the men of the region often looked down upon women, though they too were made in the image of God. But on this day, the Lord sent a deliverer. A man appeared, strong and solemn, with the air of one accustomed to both labor and sorrow. Seeing the shepherds' unjust treatment of the women, he rose in their defense, driving the men away with a force that left no room for dispute. Then, without a word of complaint, he drew water for the sisters and their flocks, his actions speaking of a heart guided by justice and mercy. When they returned to their father, Jethro marveled at how quickly they had finished their task. "How is it that you have come so soon today?" he asked. They replied, "An Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds and also drew water for us and watered the flock." "Where is he?" Jethro asked. "Why have you left the man? Call him, that he may eat bread." Thus Moses, the man chosen by God yet fleeing from his past, came into the household of Jethro. Over time, he revealed his story, how he had been raised in Pharaoh's palace, how he had learned of his Hebrew heritage, and how he had fled Egypt after slaying an Egyptian taskmaster who was beating one of his brethren. Zipporah listened intently, her heart stirred by his testimony and by the weight of the calling she sensed upon him, though he himself did not yet fully understand it. In time, Moses took Zipporah as his wife, and she bore him a son, whom he named Gershom, saying, "I have been a stranger in a strange land." Their life together in Midian was one of simplicity and labor, yet God was at work, preparing Moses for the great task that lay ahead. One day, as Moses tended the flock of Jethro near Mount Horeb, the mountain of God, he encountered the living God in a flame of fire within a bush that burned but was not consumed. The voice of the Lord called to him, saying, "Moses, Moses." And he said, "Here am I." The Lord said, "I have surely seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt, and I have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. And I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land unto a good land and a large, unto a land flowing with milk and honey. Come now therefore, and I will send thee unto Pharaoh, that thou mayest bring forth my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. When Moses returned to his family and recounted all that had transpired, Zipporah was filled with a mixture of awe and fear. The thought of returning to Egypt, the land of oppression and judgment, was overwhelming. Yet she trusted in the Lord's plan and in the man he had chosen. As they journeyed toward Egypt, a mysterious and terrifying event occurred. The Lord met Moses and sought to kill him, for he had neglected the covenantal sign of circumcision for his son. Zipporah, perceiving the seriousness of the moment and moved by the Spirit of God, took a sharp stone and circumcised her son. Touching Moses' feet with the blood, she said, "Surely a bridegroom of blood art thou to me." At this, the Lord's wrath was turned away, and Moses was spared. This act of obedience and faith by Zipporah affirmed the covenant between God and his people, a moment that underscored the gravity of Moses' mission and the holiness of the God he served. When they arrived in Egypt, Zipporah witnessed the mighty hand of God at work as Moses stood before Pharaoh, declaring, "Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, let my people go." She saw the signs and wonders, the rod turning into a serpent, the plagues that demonstrated the Lord's power over the gods of Egypt, and the hardening of Pharaoh's heart. Yet amid these great displays of divine power, her heart ached for the suffering of the people, both Hebrew and Egyptian, knowing that the Lord's justice is always tempered by his mercy. In time, Moses sent Zipporah and their sons back to Jethro for their safety, and she remained in Midian until after the great deliverance of the Israelites from Egypt. When Jethro brought her and the children to reunite with Moses at Mount Sinai, their joy was complete. Together, they stood in awe as the Lord descended upon the mountain in fire, giving his law to his people and reaffirming his covenant with them. Throughout the wilderness journey, Zipporah remained a steadfast presence, her faith and courage a quiet yet vital part of the story of God's redemption. Her life was a testimony to the truth that the Lord uses both men and women in his divine purposes, and her obedience in moments of great trial reminds us that faith is not measured by outward power but by the quiet strength of a heart devoted to God.